The rain had just begun to fall over the glass roof of the Voss Innovations Tower when Ava Clark stood in front of his office door, clutching the folded sonogram in her trembling hand. She had rehearsed this moment for days, in the mirror on the bus, even while lying awake at night listening to her heartbeat echo against the quiet of her apartment. He'll be surprised, she told herself. But happy. Rylan had always talked about wanting a family someday. Surely he'd smile, maybe pull her close, maybe whisper that she'd just made him the luckiest man alive. But as the door slid open, reality came wrapped in cold blue light and silence. Rylan Voss, CEO of a company the world worshipped, didn't look up immediately. His silver cufflinks caught the reflection of the city skyline as he typed something sharp and fast into his laptop. The office smelled faintly of cedar and ozone. Sterile, masculine, efficient like him. "Ava," he said without warmth, "you don't have an appointment." She hesitated. "I didn't think I needed one." He sighed, finally leaning back, his expression unreadable. "Make it quick. I'm due in a meeting." Her throat was dry. "Rylan," she began softly, I'm pregnant." For one heartbeat, the world held still. The sound of the rain intensified against the skylight, each drop echoing the silence that fell between them. She waited for him to smile, to reach for her, but his eyes only widened slightly before narrowing into something cold and foreign. "Pregnant," he repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. "Yes," she whispered. "Ours, I just found out last week. I wanted you to be the first to know." "Stop." His voice cut through hers like a blade. "Ava, this isn't what I want." Her heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" 2 months after the storm that tore her heart apart, Ava Clark found herself far from the metallic hum of the city. The coastal town of Marlow Bay was nothing like Voss Tower's sterile glass halls. Here, salt clung to the air, the waves whispered against pale rocks, and people still looked one another in the eye. She rented a small cottage with sea blue shutters that creaked in the wind, its garden wild with lavender and overgrown grass. Every morning the gulls cried above her window as the sunrise painted gold over the sea. She would sit by the window with her growing belly, tracing her fingers over the glass, feeling the rhythm of life inside her. The world had gone quiet, but her heart had not. She missed him, despite everything. Sometimes at night, she could still feel Rylan's touch on her skin. Remember the way his voice had softened when he'd once whispered her name. She hated herself for it. She had seen his betrayal. Yet her heart still wandered toward the past like a ghost to an open door. But then came the night her contractions began. It was a storm again, as if fate refused to let her meet her children without thunder. She labored alone, her hands clutching the sheets, her breath shallow and desperate. Pain tore through her, but she refused to give in to fear. There was no one to hold her hand, no voice to calm her, only her will. When it was over, 2 cries broke through the storm. Twin girls, tiny, perfect, and fierce as the sea outside. She named them Nora and Liz. Nora was calm, her dark eyes steady and deep, while Liz was restless, kicking even as she slept. Their tiny fingers wrapped around Ava's, and something inside her healed in that moment. Not completely, but enough to breathe again. For months, the 3 of them lived in rhythm with the sea. Ava painted to earn a little money, selling her artwork to the local gallery owner, a kind older woman named Mira, who adored the twins. She told her, "You've got light in your fingers, dear. Even your sadness shines." On quiet afternoons, Ava would take the girls down to the shore. They'd sit on a faded blanket while she hummed softly, sketching waves in charcoal and remembering what it felt like to be touched without pain. Then one afternoon, while walking along the pier, she met Elias. He was a marine biologist, quiet and thoughtful, with sun-worn hands and an easy smile that carried no weight of expectation. He had come to Marlow Bay for his research, but it was the sight of Ava, standing barefoot in the sand holding both her daughters, that caught his attention. They talked easily. He didn't ask about her past, only about her art, her daughters, and the way she always paused to look at the sea as if it were a living thing that spoke to her. "You listen to it," he said one day, his voice soft, "as if it knows what you've been through." "Maybe it does," she replied. "The sea keeps secrets better than people," Elias smiled. "Then I'll trust it to keep yours safe." Weeks turned into months. Elias began visiting often, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with seashells for the twins. He'd stay for dinner, his laughter mixing with the crackle of the fire, slowly, gently. He became part of their little world. One evening, as the sky burned crimson over the horizon, he took her hand. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Ava." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long time she didn't see pity or curiosity. She saw warmth, truth. Still her heart hesitated. "I don't know if I can love again," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then let me just stay, until you do." That night, as the twins slept beside her, Ava listened to the waves and felt something shift deep inside. Not love yet, not fully, but the promise of it. For the first time since that awful day beneath the glass skylight, she didn't dream of Rylan. She dreamed of the sea, of peace, and somewhere miles away in the city, Rylan Voss was about to lose everything he had traded her for. He stood straightening his tie. "I've been seeing someone else." The words crashed over her before she could brace herself. "Someone else?" "Serene," he said flatly. "She's part of the research division. It just happened. And this," he gestured vaguely toward her, toward the invisible child, "doesn't change anything." Her knees went weak. "You're saying you're leaving me?" He didn't even blink. "It's already over, Ava. I thought you knew." She stared at him, searching his face for some sign of the man she'd fallen in love with. The one who used to trace her shoulders under the pale morning light, whispering promises that felt eternal. Now his eyes were like glass, reflecting nothing. "You're serious," she breathed. He nodded once, picking up his tablet. "It's better this way. You'll understand eventually." Something inside her broke cleanly. Not a crack, not a tear, but a shattering that left her hollow. She turned away before he could see the tears, before her voice could betray the sound of her heart collapsing. The elevator doors closed behind her with a final, echoing chime. By the time she reached the street, the rain had become a downpour. Her reflection blurred in every window she passed, a ghost walking away from the ruins of her life. That night, in the small corner of her apartment, she sat on the floor, the sonogram still in her hand. She pressed her palm to her stomach and whispered, "We'll be okay, even if it's just us." Outside, thunder rolled over the city like an ending, but for Ava, it was only the beginning. Rylan Voss stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the city stretching endlessly below him, all glass, ambition, and noise. But inside the sleek walls, silence pressed in like a weight. The empire he'd built with cold precision was beginning to crumble. Contracts were slipping through his fingers, investors were pulling back, and headlines whispered of scandal. Voss Innovations under investigation. He'd thought he could bury the past beneath success. Bury her. But every time he caught his reflection in the glass, he saw her face, the storm in her eyes the day she walked away, the way her voice had trembled when she said, "You're not losing me to another man, Rylan. You're losing me to yourself." He'd told himself he didn't care, but he hadn't been able to sleep since. His fiancée, the woman he'd chosen over Ava, had left 2 months ago, taking what little humanity he had left with her. He'd come home one night to find the ring tossed into his glass of bourbon, a short note beside it. "You built an empire but forgot how to love." Rylan poured himself another drink now. His jaw clenched as lightning flared beyond the window. Ironic, he thought. The storms always came when he was at his lowest. Then his phone buzzed. "Mr. Voss," came his assistant's hesitant voice. "There's something you need to see." Minutes later, he was standing in the lobby of his own company, watching as men in suits, federal investigators, carried boxes out the front doors. Documents, hard drives, prototypes. Years of work gone. "You signed off on falsified contracts," one of them said sharply. "Your head of finance has already confessed." Rylan barely heard him. His vision blurred as the storm outside echoed the chaos within him. He'd been so consumed with control, so desperate to dominate the world that he hadn't noticed the rot growing from within his own walls. He staggered into the elevator, heart pounding, hands trembling. When the doors closed, the reflection that stared back at him looked nothing like the man he once was. His tie hung loose, his eyes hollow, and for the first time, he whispered the truth aloud. "I lost everything because I lost her." In Marlow Bay, life was simpler, softer. Ava sat by the window painting as Nora and Liz napped nearby. The sea glimmered beneath a pale afternoon sun. She hadn't seen or heard from Rylan in over a year, and the ache that used to haunt her had dulled to something distant, like an old scar. Elias had become part of their lives, gentle, steady, the kind of man who noticed the small things, how Ava tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, how Nora hummed softly when she dreamed. He never pushed her to forget. He just made sure she remembered she was loved. That evening, they all walked to the beach, the twins chasing waves, Elias carrying their tiny shoes in one hand. The sky was painted gold and rose, and for the first time, Ava felt a fragile kind of peace settle in her chest. "Do you ever think you'll go back?" Elias asked softly, eyes on the horizon. Ava shook her head. "There's nothing there for me anymore." But even as she said it, a strange unease flickered in her chest, the kind that comes when the world begins to shift because far away. Rylan Voss was sitting in a hospital corridor, blood on his sleeve, the sterile scent of antiseptic choking the air. He'd been driving too fast in the rain, not caring if the road ended. Now, as he waited for news from the doctor, a quiet voice broke through his haze. "Sir, you were lucky," the nurse said. "The woman who pulled you from the wreck saved your life." He turned sharply. "What woman?" "She didn't leave a name," the nurse said with a faint smile. "But she had sea blue eyes, and she smelled like salt and paint." Rylan froze. His heart stopped for just a moment, and in that stillness, he knew. It was her. The scent of antiseptic and rain filled the hospital corridors as Rylan Voss slowly regained consciousness. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was steady but unnerving. His head throbbed, his ribs burned with every breath, and his right arm was strapped in a cast. The memories came back in fragments. Headlights, screeching tires, and then the sound of a woman's voice shouting his name before everything went dark. He opened his eyes to the faint light of morning, filtered through sheer curtains. A nurse stood by the door, updating a clipboard. "Mr. Voss, you're awake," she said softly. "You had a nasty accident. You were lucky someone found you." His throat felt like sandpaper. "Someone?" he rasped. "Who?" The nurse hesitated, then smiled faintly. "She didn't stay long. Just enough to pull you out of the wreck before the fire spread. She said she used to know you." Rylan froze. His pulse quickened. "What was her name?" "She didn't give one. Just—" She had long dark hair, a gentle voice. The nurse paused as if replaying the moment. "And the most striking blue eyes I've ever seen." The room tilted. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them once in a boardroom reflection, once more in a hospital years ago when his mother had passed, and again every night in his dreams since he'd walked away from her. "Ava." His voice cracked. Did she leave an address? A number?" The nurse shook her head. "No, but she left this." She handed him a folded note, its edges smudged with fingerprints and faint paint stains. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Some storms come back to test what we've rebuilt. Take care of yourself, Rylan." He leaned back against the pillow, his chest tightening. After all this time, she had saved him. The irony wasn't lost on him. She had once begged him to choose life with her, and he'd chosen ambition. Now she'd given him life again without asking for anything in return. Miles away, the rain tapped gently against the window of Ava's small coastal apartment. She stood by the stove, stirring a pot of soup while Nora and Liz played on the floor with blocks. Elias entered quietly, hanging his coat. "You haven't told me what really happened that night," he said softly. Ava's hand paused over the pot. She exhaled slowly. "There was a car crash on the old highway. I didn't know who it was until I saw him. I just acted." "You saved him," Elias said, watching her closely. "The man who destroyed you." Ava turned, her eyes shimmering but steady. "I didn't do it for him. I did it because I needed to know I wasn't like him. I needed to prove to myself that love doesn't have to die just because it's been betrayed." Elias nodded, though a shadow crossed his expression. "And what if he comes looking for you?" She looked out the window, watching the storm fade into gray mist. Then fate will decide what happens next. 2 days later, it did. Rylan arrived in Marlow Bay under a gray sky, his arm still in a sling. He didn't know how he'd found the place, maybe instinct, maybe guilt guiding his steps. Every street corner, every salty gust of wind felt like a memory waiting to be reclaimed. He found her by chance near the library. She was kneeling beside 2 little girls, both with tangled curls and bright eyes. Blue eyes. His world stopped. One of the twins looked up and pointed at him. "Mommy, that man's staring." Ava turned. Their eyes met across the cobblestone street, years collapsing into a single breath. She froze, a grocery bag slipping from her hand, oranges rolling across the wet pavement. The wind caught her hair, framing a face both familiar and changed. Stronger, softer. Ryland took a step forward, voice trembling. "Ava!" She didn't move. The twins clung to her coat, confused. His heart pounded, his chest tight with words he'd rehearsed 1,000 times but never spoken. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. You were everything." Instead, all that came out was a whisper. "They're mine, aren't they?" The world seemed to hold its breath. Ava's jaw tightened. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed years of buried pain. "You don't get to ask that." Ryland swallowed hard, tears gathering in his eyes. "Please, let me explain." "You've had years to explain," she said quietly. "But you chose silence." And then she turned away, leading her daughters toward home, toward the life she built without him. But Ryland didn't move. He stood there in the drizzle, watching her disappear into the fog, realizing the cruel truth.